Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited that this weekend of new music is finally here and happening. And we're starting off tonight with, I have members of Load Bang with me, Andy Kozar and Ty Boak. And then we have Christopher Otto, who has a new commission that we're going to be hearing tonight for violin and piano, and we'll speak a bit about that, and pianist Ning Yu. So please join me in welcoming them. I think a good place to start would just be, just if you don't mind, Andy or Ty, talking a bit about the origin of your ensemble, because I don't know how many of you have heard this ensemble before, but you're essentially the originators, I think, of this format. And you go ahead. And just say
so we are trumpet, trombone, bass, clarinet, and baritone voice. And our origin was actually the four founding members of the quartet, of which myself and our trombonist Will are the remaining two. Started the ensemble when we were at Manhattan School of Music doing a master's in contemporary music, and I think none of us had decided, we had sort of dreamt this instrumentation and just thought it would be perfect. The origin of the instrumentation is actually that we were all best friends and wanted to play music together. And there was no music. There was no music written for that instrumentation. So we started, our very first concert was on a concert series we were sort of running at the school called Will and Andy's Power Concerts, which were 20-minute concerts at 10 p.m. every Tuesday night. And the idea was that it was kind of a salon where we could present things that our friends were up to or that we were doing, and then we would all go hang afterwards. And so the first Load Bang concert was the April Fool's Day of 2008 Power Concert, and because we didn't have any music for us, our original singer Jeff Gavitt wrote a piece for us. We did Earl Brown, December 1952, the graphic score, and then because it was April Fool's Day, we sang two barbershop quartets very poorly. And it was so fun working together and creating a thing together. So we started asking all the other composers at school and the faculty, and within 6 months of being around, we started reaching quite high, and just, David Lang, would you like to write a piece for us? And he said yes, right? And so these sort of, the ball started rolling. And so we've been doing it now since 2008 and have commissioned and premiered over 550 pieces for the quartet. Yeah.
That's really unheard of. I mean, that's an amazing, to go from nothing for that ensemble to that many. It's really an accomplishment.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I think the thing that has sort of sustained us too is that the origin was, it wasn't that we were in school and happened to play these instruments and needed to find somebody else that played another instrument that we could slot into some sort of pre-formed instrumentation that is acceptable within the canon. And for us, because the origin was friendship, it became much easier to sustain it because we were together because we wanted to be together. We had sort of found each other and then dealt with the music end of it later. Sure. Yeah.
And just to kind of reaffirm that perspective that it still goes on, when I joined a few years ago, when Jeff Gavitt, the original singer, decided that he had 12 years was his end point, and the audition was an hour's worth of playing music together, and then an hour's worth of like, let's go grab a beer. Like, can we hang out together? You're on tour for 3-4 months of the year together. Like, the thing that matters with this instrumentation is not just that it's, yes, that the instruments can go together and that the work of the quartet is showing audiences that they can, but it's also the joy of like, I can look you in the eyes on stage and be at that moment together every time. That sense of trust, that sense of friendship is still sort of foundational for the four of us.
That's wonderful. Well, maybe we can take a look. I think we'll go in just program order just so we can kind of hit a little bit about each one. And maybe we'll start with the Sebastian Courier piece, which opens the program, and which I would mention is a Kusavitsky Foundation commission that's administered through the library. So we're very pleased to be presenting that. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, Sebastian's piece is one of two pieces in the program with electronics. So we'll open and end the program with kind of Load Bang and electronics. The setting is a Mary Shelley text, not Frankenstein, of course, but her second novel, which is much less read, which is a kind of apocalyptic end of the world, like climate catastrophe. So way in advance of the sort of current environmental ongoingness. Yeah. And so there's the work plays with a kind of post-human perspective, this sort of female voice from beyond speaking through like old electronics to reach kind of a documented, like, these are my last thoughts as the world is ending, as the last sort of human around. So those all happen in and around the speakers, and it sits on the singing body a little bit, but by and large it is like the delegate of the robot voice that tells you about the end times, this kind of captured post-human body. Yeah, it's quite a saga of a piece.
That sounds amazing, and it also incorporates some from Percy Bysshe as well.
Yeah.
That's is that one of the format of that novel? Is it one of the like a diary style?
Yeah.
I read it a long time ago.
It's amazing. Yeah. The text is gorgeous, and there's some really lovely. I think part of the attraction for Sebastian was that it's fairly explicit about the thing that I will miss most, and when the world is gone, is music. So music itself plays a role in the text.
The next piece that you're doing after that is by Hilda Paredes.
Yeah.
And that's recently completed, right?
Yeah, we did the premiere a month ago, maybe, or so, month and a half. And this piece has kind of an interesting origin too. We have sort of internal load bank meetings where we're talking about who are our bucket list composers, who are these people that we really are just sort of so excited to hopefully work with someday. And Hilda was one of these composers, and we had worked together in a couple grant applications, and nothing panned out. And so the interest was still there, but it had been sort of placed on the back burner. And then we received a grant from the Siemens Fund in Munich for a commission from the composer Brian Ferneyhough, who was another one of these folks on our sort of bucket list. Soon after getting the commission, he ended up being, just because of health reasons, unable to fulfill the commission, but the Siemens Fund was gracious enough to let us pick somebody else and come back to them and see what they think. So we brought Hilda to them to see what they thought, and they were totally on board, and so she wrote this piece and has dedicated it to Brian Ferneyhough, who's a longtime colleague and friend. The piece has been a real joy for us. Ferociously difficult at first, and after the premiere and after sort of getting a feel for how the piece moves and how our parts move within it, has become an incredibly organic and really fun piece for us to live in for the 7 or 8 minutes. It feels longer to me because there's so much happening, but I think it is only 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah, the title, which is from the poem, it says "Lo inaudible." This idea of like vestiges of feelings and sensations in the world that never quite that one never quite hears as objects, but are always just kind of creeping up on the senses. So there's all of these. All 4 of us have lines where half the notes are taken out. So notes will appear, and then we'll go back to kind of these like whispery sounds, and notes will appear. So these fragments of sort of worldly experiences that just touch the back of the neck before disappearing. That's the kind of premise of the poem, and so Hilda takes that rather literally and sort of weaves it through the 4 of us with breath.
That's wonderful. I mean, before we move on to the next piece, I'm wondering if, just in your experience with these 550-ish works, has there been any sort of common practice that has developed, or like that you've noticed as certain trends of composers doing certain types of things, or is it really just like everybody has this individual? I mean, especially when you add the element of text, that brings a great deal of variety to it just by itself. But I'm just curious.
I would say, I don't know that there's necessarily a common thread, but I will say that the ones that we find the most fun to play are the ones that truly treat us all as four individual players, and 4 individual people who happen to play these instruments we play. So it's not just a trumpet part, but it's like a trumpet part catered to the sort of things I do well or I'm really interested in doing. And in the same way, it's not written for X person with a voice, but is truly written for Ty. And so I think sometimes, every now and again, we'll get a piece where it very much is, the words are important, the instrumentals are accompaniment. and that's less fun for us. And I think probably less fun for the audience because there's so much more. And I think for us, the pieces that are really fun, text or not, is when the text is important, that's fantastic. We can do all these things to shape it, but we all have a very clear part to play within the sort of organism that is the quartet.
Yeah, we have this older piece from composer Han Lash, who now teaches at IU, and the piece is titled 8 Lungs, which is very literal with our 4 bodies, right? 4 bodies, 8 lungs. All 4 of the instruments are breath oriented. So much of what the kind of like tying thread of the work that we do is vocalic, and not in the sense that every instrument has at one time been described as the singing flute, the singing violin. Everything can kind of sing, but the 4 of us spent a really long time honing how does at what threshold does a voice sound just like a trombone, and when in what register does a bass clarinet sound just like a trumpet. And so you get this kind of really finessed bleed between instruments, between bodies that are all kind of singing through varying apertures. And so the ability or inability to tell who's who and what's what in any given moment has been, I think, the real joy of learning to work together.
That's wonderful. I think I'm gonna have to check out that piece.
Yeah.
I should remember.
Yeah.
7, no, 8.
8 lungs.
Yes, as far as we know.
Yeah, right.
Well, looking at the kind of this middle of the concert, I have to give one word of explanation here, which is that Leonore Jackson McKim was a fantastic violinist who, when she passed away, ended up giving this an endowment that is used to commission new works for violin and piano. And what is amazing about that fund is it allows us to engage the fund whenever we present either a work that has already been commissioned, or more exciting for me is when we're able to commission a new piece. And that's what we were able to do with Christopher Otto for this concert. And so this new, we have to, I always say thank you to Mrs. McKim for allowing a lot of concerts over the years, over the past 50 or so years, to happen at the Library of Congress. So she was very forward thinking, just like a lot of our patrons have been. But we're very excited for this new piece from Christopher Otto, who is going to be playing as well. He's an amazing violinist as well as an amazing composer. And I think that there's so much that I'm reacting to with the piece, but I would want to hear just a bit about what you were thinking with this piece and where you kind of started with it and where you are now.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's such a great opportunity to have this performance, get to work with Ning and share the stage with Loadbang. I'm so excited to hear your pieces. And it was violin and piano is obviously an instrumentation that there are many, many pieces for. So one of the things I struggled with was, first of all, I hadn't written for the piano in about 20 years, since the piece I wrote for you in college. David played my piece, Cynostures, in 2005 or so. But I stayed away from the piano. I love the piano, but because I needed to explore the overtone series and natural harmonics and what's called just intonation, different tuning systems on the violin, and I mainly stuck with strings for a long time. And I actually also recently wrote a piece for Loadbang that pushed me to finally reintegrate winds into my world. And they did a great job, amazing. Anyway, getting back to this piece, I struggled, as I said, with the violin and the piano being such different, having really different approaches and tunings and temperaments. So I wanted to find something that both played on the duality, but also integrated them into a seamless whole. And it was really fun to do. I went through a lot of false starts and dead ends, but it sort of developed organically and pulled me in a direction which was very different stylistically from anything I've written recently. I think most of my stuff, there are drone-like elements and harmonic interactions that have been part of my music for a long time. But in this piece, there's also just a lot of fun and silliness and kind of huge gestures and yeah.
Can I ask you a question about that? Sorry. I have to imagine that, going to school and playing violin, you play a bunch of rep with violin and piano, right? You work with or at some point in your life, you have played a bunch with violin and piano, no?
For sure,
do you have
Yeah.
any repertoire that has stuck with you over the years that you're like, I don't actually hate that, like this romantic repertoire, or is there stuff from that period that you don't?
So much that I love. Yeah. I keep one of the pieces I first heard in high school was Bartok's First Sonata. And I heard the Gidon Kramer and Martha Argerich recording, and I just fell in love with that. And I still, I've played it, and then, it's not like something a repertoire that I regularly play, but that's just one example.
It's a great one. Good choice.
Sure. Well, Ning, what has been your experience with this? Because it's a mildly difficult piano part, right? I mean,
Do you want to give them parentheses? You're being sarcastic. Well,
Thank you for learning all these notes. Yeah, here I gave Ning a lot to deal with here. It should really be two people, I think. Yeah.
we just talked about it. We do have another pianist, on hand. We could split a little bit. But first of all, thank you for having me playing. And, Chris and I sort of, the three of us go way back to student days. And then when we first started rehearsing, we're talking about the things that we played together as college students, and looking at some of those things that we were playing, and then talking about the experience of learning, who we learned from, how to count this really complex rhythm, how to approach it today. And it's it's really fun to think back and think of how this is so difficult, but so fun. And especially now that we've been working on this piece, and I've been working on it on myself, was a bit of a shock when I first got it, because I listened to Chris's his wonderful album with Jack Quartet, and I was like, okay, I'm getting some drony notes, and maybe and then David said, oh no, it's very, very difficult. It's going to be very hard, but it's going to be so fun. And I get the music, and it was like, okay. It's like, oh, okay. So there's really a progression to the piece, and I think hopefully that does not translate into the audience, and what you get is just this enormous shape and just joy, really, to hear this music.
to me, there's these flow states that you guys almost get into, at these different points of these. It feels like these cycles kind of going over and over again, but in just very interesting ways. And I think it's. I don't know, Chris, if you want to say anything about if you care to say anything about what I perceive as sort of a folksy element.
Yeah, a different side of my playing came out kind of recently through, I don't know, a confluence of different factors, which include hearing Amish singing. And my father grew up Amish, and I have Amish ancestors, but I didn't grow up directly hearing that music. But I encountered it, and also just listened to some recordings here at the library that only exist. There's very rare, and it was very fascinating to me to, not that I'm trying to imitate exactly on the violin anything, but the quality and the spirituality behind it, and the fact that these hymns, one hymn in particular, Das Loblied, that goes back over 500 years of evolution, and it really struck a chord with me. And yeah, I started integrating it into a kind of microtonal context and seeing, and that's very monophonic music in a sense, or it's sort of one line that is more or less matched, but in this contrapuntal setting, it's completely changed by the harmonic context and all the other streams of influence that exist in my music. So there's a kind of meeting of different worlds that I was just curious to see what came out of that.
I guess the last question I have for you for now is that is this something that you see as something you'll explore further, or do you anticipate doing more of? I mean, I understand maybe a violin and piano second piece is not maybe right on the docket, but I don't know. Is this?
Yeah, it was really. I was really curious about this. Also, the duration of the commission. It ended up around 11 minutes, and I packed a lot into that. I think I just wanted. I had so much I wanted to say, and it just sort of poured out. But I could imagine expanding it in various ways and having different realizations and versions. And but yeah, it's every piece is still involves a lot of original components, and so I don't know. This could be a one-off. I don't know, but it might go for. I might go further with it.
Well, that's great. I mean, whichever direction you go, it's really going to be a fascinating piece for me. Just getting to hear it just now, so I think you're in for a real treat, and so we're looking forward to it. Going back to Load Bang, that's going to be the center of the concert. Then Load Bang will play two more pieces. The next one will be by Michael Finnessy, and that one involves some Walt Whitman texts, some of which are held at the Library of Congress. And so I was wondering if you could say a few words about that. And we have some stuff on display, I think, as well.
Yeah, the display is really lovely. I sent Michael photos, and he was very excited to see the score out. The last two works on our program, which will have a tough act to follow, so apologies in advance, are real points of advocacy for support of young composers. I met Michael as a young singer at a new music festival in Boston years ago, and I was singing a piece of his for baritone and piano trio that was gorgeous and luscious and difficult, and in the rehearsal we immediately hit it off and started chatting. He gave me his email, tore off a slip of paper in his notebook, and so we kept in touch. And I sang that piece again at Cornell at a student residency we did, and the other three boys heard it and were like, this is really good, we should do something with Michael. The important thing to know about Michael's music is he is one of the most studied historians in composition. Michael's house is a mess because for years when he was living in London, he worked behind the shop at a music publisher, and so anything that had doubles he took. And so there is every work of Janacek's, every work of Bach. He's a fantastic pianist. In the 70s, he was the only pianist good enough to be playing Fernie-Ho, to be playing Barrett, to be playing really difficult music that was sort of pushing the limits of technical capacity. So he's a fantastic musician first and foremost, and a really studied historian second. And so his music has this really tactile relationship to the past. And it's never just transcription. It's never just a copy of something old in his music. He always, when he takes things, they change in his hand. So he'll begin to copy out something, a Moravian folk song, and then it will begin to change. And he'll begin to he'll take it once and then add a layer of information, and take it another time and add a layer of information. So across this piece, Michael, I think, picked the Whitman texts. He's gay, he's married to an organist, of course. Well, pianists, musicians, naturally. But Michael has a really vested interest in kind of historical queerness, historical iterations of homosexuality. So he's got settings of Cavafy, he has settings now of Whitman, actually several settings of Whitman, and settings of texts that men wrote in the hospital as they were dying of AIDS in England. So his archival impulse, his preservationist impulse is really key here. The Whitman texts are letters between Peter Doyle, Whitman's longtime lover, and Whitman himself. And the letters reveal a strange tension between the two of them. Yes, erotic, but also Whitman is highly intelligent and incredibly articulate and very commandeering of the relationship. And Doyle was a soldier who never went to college and was 10, 15 years younger. And the two of them, there was a power dynamic Doyle would say things that Whitman would then use in poetry, and that bothered Peter. And there's this this difficulty in case Walt is a very difficult human to be around, as I think we all are with our spouses sometimes. But Michael wanted to work with this text, I think, because no, I'm not. Can you imagine? Michael wanted to work with this text, I think, for a really vested interest in the American folk. He's a huge Ives fan, so this sense of like American history piling on top of itself musically became a really kind of severe point of interest for him. A real fascination with what Whitman has come to mean for us, like what music would have been played in Whitman's time. There are references to old Italian operas that Whitman and Doyle would have gone to, that he then went to the British libraries to find the manuscripts for, so he could copy out some melodies from those and include them sort of buried into the music. Doyle was present at the shooting of Lincoln, and so music that would have been played by the bands in and around like that town at that time so there's this historical archive built, but also translated by Michael's own penmanship. So you'll hear things that sound kind of like a march, and it is, but it's been forgotten, or it's been altered, or it's been warped in memory. So there's all these kinds of traces of Whitman's own time in the piece. It's very beautiful.
Thank you for that description. Really powerful. I think another question I have about that kind of contextualization that you're talking about, is there incorporation of Whitman poetry as well, right? Or is it how does that interact with
there's a little bit in a couple places, a couple lines, and they're all the ones given in italics in the score are the lines that are taken from the poetry. I think the place Michael looked for was if you read writers. Hervé Guibert is a good example of this, French writer who died in 91. Guibert used his diaries to try out characters, to try out lines, to try out phrasings, and you'll get them 3-4 times, and then you'll open the book that he was writing at that time, and there it is. But not quite the same. So I think Michael looked for these little resonances in the poems that echoed something that would have been happening or would have been being said between Doyle and Whitman at the time. So there's these little nested kind of references in there.
That's fascinating. Looking forward to that as well.
Yeah.
The last piece in the program is Laura Cecilia. Tell us about this piece.
Yeah, so from 2023 to 2025, we were ensemble in residence at Cornell. And it was part of a Stephen Stuckey Memorial Residency Program. So we would go there for a week each semester, and we would be housed in student housing. They have this really wonderful housing situation where there are these studio apartments for guests to live in. So we each had our own apartments, and we're living with the students, and we're working with the students, and we have a sort of cohort of PhD composers we're working with throughout the year. And I think because of this, because of the fact that not only are we working together, they're getting to hear us play samples for them, we're getting to workshop things, but we're also getting to get dinner together, we're getting to get coffee and breaks, we're getting to actually know each other. Unlike I think any other university or institutional residencies we've had, we ended up with pieces from this that were all fantastic. Just extraordinary pieces, many of which we still perform. Laura's pieces on a record we just released a couple weeks ago. And so Laura is a cellist and an improviser who came to us with the first sketches for her piece, and it didn't work at all. It just didn't work because I think she had never written for Wynn's brass singers before, and she came to it, she had this idea of this incredibly 45, 50-minute long piece, constant sound the whole time, and we tried it for her, and we're like, I'm so sorry, but I have to breathe. I wish, the thing that you have written is beautiful, and it's my limitation that is ruining it, but I do have to breathe. And so we left that workshop, and then less than 6 months, a few months later, we received the final version of this piece she had written, which was wholly different from the sketch she had done for us and perfect in every way. She just had come up with this incredibly beautiful piece called Breath of Cinder, Depth of Moss. So she is a person who is deeply connected to the natural world, a lot of outside time with her, and that and the nature of our breath, the fact that we have to use this, not only became something she had to find ways around, but actually directly incorporated into what the piece was. And we played it probably now
2 dozen times.
24 times. I think it's one of those pieces when we have to sort of remind ourselves that like we should not play this piece every time, because we do have other pieces, but it just feels so good to play. It's hard to not put it on concerts.
And 2 Laura stories that I think help clarify the work a lot. At the concert when we premiered it at Cornell, they asked each one of the students who had written for us to come up and say a little bit about their piece before the concert. And Laura comes up, again, cellist, it's important to know. She comes up and she goes, "Sometimes when you go over to a friend's house and they ask you to cook, you don't know where anything is. And cooking in somebody else's house is really confusing, and it's very hard to make the recipe you know by heart if you don't know where the colander is." And I didn't know where the colander was. And she has these wonderful metaphors, these wonderful images that I think she really utilizes to explain her music. And then at the end of hers was the last piece in the program, we finished it out, and it was spring in Ithaca, and all the windows were open in this chapel. And as we're finishing the piece, the electronics are fading out, and there are birds who have, like, the spring has just begun. So the birds are just starting to make noise outside, and they're all sort of singing out in the trees. And everyone sat perfectly still for another 60 seconds at the end of the piece and just let the kind of noise of the world bleed in for a moment. It's one of these pieces that it vibrates in just the way that kind of anything that happens in the hall gets subsumed into its world. And so it was just this really magical moment of just like top of the hill, old chapel, birds singing outside. So as you listen to the end of the piece tonight, imagine all the bird songs that are floating through.
Thank you. I just have a last question for each of you, and maybe starting with Chris and Ning. We're going to be hearing Chris and Ning again tomorrow at the concert with that's called Muntendorf's Trilogy, which you should definitely all come to as well. I'm going to commit you to that right now. And but they're going to be doing another work by Muhal Richard Abrams as part of that concert. And then Ning will be playing with Corey Smythe, this very incredible work for 2 pianos. So I hope that you can come. But now that I've stolen that thunder a little bit, what else do you have coming up, and like what kinds of other projects do you have on the immediate horizon? Maybe Chris, you want to start?
Well, my main thing is playing with the Jack Quartet, and we are going to Ojai Festival in California, and then we have a bit of a break, but we're going to Santa Fe in July, and then back to New York for the Time Spans Festival, and
Is Ojai next week? Is that just
next
very
week,
soon? Yeah.
right after this? Yeah.
What's in the festival?
Oh wow, a lot of stuff. Yeah, Terry Riley, Vicente Atria Hansen. I'll let you check out the website and if anyone wants to come there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Ning, what about you?
Immediately after here, I'm really excited to start a new project with composer Celeste Oram. She might be a not very familiar voice here. She's recent, I guess, important into New York City, and but she is I first sort of saw her play at Darmstadt a few years ago, and was just like so absorbed by her own performance as a singer, but also her work. And so finally, after so many years, like now 5 years after seeing her perform, hearing her music, we're finally starting our collaboration together. So she's coming for several days of workshop. But
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, very cool. I do hope that some of these, I know that you all do this when you can and when there's funding available too, but that you record as many of these things as possible, so that those of us who aren't able to catch everything, we're able to find it that way. I'm assuming you're going to take this piece on the road that you're playing tonight. So
Yeah. Well, hopefully. Yeah. We'll see how it goes. And, we haven't committed beyond tonight.
Okay. Right. Well, what about Load Bang? What's on your horizon?
Yeah, We have each summer we run a summer festival at the Lanchi School of Music called Divergent Studio, where we invite performers and composers, student performers and composers, to come work with us for 2 weeks. So the composers will have all written pieces for us that we already have and are rehearsing, and we'll work together. And the performers are all paired in different chamber music ensembles and organizations, and we bring in composition guests each year too. So we have Pamela Z and Oscar Bettison coming in to work with these students, and that's just in a couple weeks. So we're really excited to do that. And then we head to New York to be guests on Amani Wins, their festival they run at Juilliard. So we'll be doing a lot of sort of education, outreach work this summer.
Awesome. And your recent recording, what other kinds of things are on that one?
Oh yeah, so we have a record that came out in early March called A Garden Adorned on New Focus Recordings. So that has Laura Cetilia's piece that we're playing tonight. It has,
Oscar Bettison.
thank you, Oscar Bettison's piece that was also a Kusevitsky commission. Yotam Haber's piece called In a Rug of Water, which is actually for 3 load bangs. So it's a sort of like Steve Reich wrote these triple quartets, right? So it's within that kind of mold. So he wrote us a triple quartet. And
Raven Chacon.
Raven Chacon, a piece called Reckoning that he wrote for us right before he won the Pulitzer. We really got
in there right
just
last possible
when we
minute.
still could have afforded it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then a piece by a young composer named Christina George, who actually wrote the first movement of the piece. This is sort of similar in some ways to Laura Cetilia's piece. Wrote the first movement of this piece as a student at Divergent Studio, and it was so beautiful and so fun to play. And we asked her if she would be interested in writing another one, sort of short movement. And she did, and it was so beautiful and so fun to play. And then she asked if she could write some more. And we said yes. So it turned into this 5-movement song cycle. She wrote all the poetry for it, and the poetry is just lovely, and the piece is really beautiful. It is this sort of romantic outpouring that is a type of playing that we don't often get to engage with, and it suits us very well. So that's on all streaming things. And I do have a few physical copies if you happen to have a machine that plays those still. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I mean, this is, I really appreciate all the work that you do to support new music and continue to be advocates as you are. So thank you so much for talking with me tonight, and really happy to have you.
And right back at you. Thank you for all the work you do to support new music and making all this possible. Seriously, we're very lucky to be here.
Yes. Thanks all around. Yes.
Thank you, David.